I want them sucking up to me because they genuinely love me.
On that note, you can be my daddy anytime, Roger.
Hi, I'm Andy,
And I'm Roger,
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics.
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
It's a slogan we should put on a t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift.
Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Roger.
Andy, how you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good. What have you been up to?
Oh, well, I actually had something quite an embarrassing experience to share, actually.
Do tell.
The other day, I went to the chemist, and my daughter, so my youngest, right, and she's only, she's under 18 months. She's developed a little bit of a rash on her chest, and she keeps kind of saying itchy, itchy, and she's just learning how to talk really early, actually. So it's very cute. But anyway, so I went to the chemist to actually buy some Vaseline to kind of put over it, form a bit of a barrier so that that it could heal. So I went into, I think it was Priceline chemist, and I wanted to get like a little jar of Vaseline, but they only had like the massive one, right? It was so big. And like a typical bloke, I didn't bring any bag or anything. So I smuggled it into my my pocket, right? But it was probably as big. It was pushing the limits of my pocket, right? It was very, very big. And so I'm kind of like, strutting out, and I'm like, I feel like getting a coffee, a takeaway coffee before I head home. And so it was in the same pocket as my mobile phone. And when it came time to pay, I kind of like fumbled, and I like tried to get my hand around my phone, and I pulled it out. And of course, this massive tub of Vaseline comes like falling out of my pocket and just like splashes on the ground. And then I just looked up, and there was this young girl working at the counter, and there was a line behind me, and they just looked at me like I was the biggest pervert. They were just like walking around with this massive tub of Vaseline, and the look was so clear. It wasn't like this kind of like funny look. It was like, oh, you're a pervert. And I instantly had this reaction to be like, no, it's for my daughter's chest. Just made me sound like even more gross, right? And I'm like, oh man, this is a bad day to have a moustache and a giant tub of Vaseline in my pocket.
Can I gotta ask, what is the primary use of Vaseline?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of uses for it, but I think
that's what I mean.
Use,
yeah.
Well, I mean, I think back in the day, the primary use was as a lip balm, right? And I think that was the main use for most people until they found out that no, actually, petroleum jelly or something was not really meant. Is not as ideal as you think it is. But I have been hearing that there's a lot of hacks now, and actually, there's a Vaseline face hack where you put it on. People are coming back to Vaseline to put on their face before they sleep, and apparently it locks in moisture and it's like an anti-aging thing. But they use it for chafing, like putting on nipples when you run and stuff like that, or getting rings off your finger and everything in between. I know as a child, my mum used it a lot for us for like cuts and grazes and things like that. I don't know. What's your relationship with Vaseline?
I remember it growing up, but yeah, I mean, I honestly, I could not think of a reason to buy Vaseline and have it in the house as like a
just
staple.
say it, Andy. Say it. It's masturbation. Is that what you're thinking of?
I don't want to take it down this conversation down that pathway, but like I must admit, like I'm conceptualizing it and I'm not getting how it works in that context. But what I was going to say is it did come up in the office for me the other week because there were some comments made about old blokes and their hair, right? And I just made this comment that like, old codgers use like Vaseline in their hair as like styling gel. And I'm just trying to think if that actually was a thing ever.
I don't think it was. I mean, they used Brill cream. I think that was the mark of an old school gentleman, which funnily enough I have used before on my hair. The old tub of Brill cream.
I might kick off with a listener question. All right, let's read this one. So Okay. Guys, I attended the Taylor Swift concert, and I got to say, it was amazing. As a dude in that crowd, I can absolutely say I enjoyed it. While there were obviously more women and girls in the stadium, there were plenty of males too, and I got to say they were singing and having fun like their wives, girlfriends, and daughters. Roger, you've got the wrong end of the stick and need to become a Swiftie. I can sign you up.
Wow.
A Swiftie. We've got Swifties in our listener base.
Are you sure this wasn't... Did you submit this question? You're like the...
I tell you what, if I got my hands on a Taylor Swift concert, I would be selling it, cashing in, and actually just to really like get my bona fides up here. I was actually at a Slash concert on the weekend when Taylor Swift was having her concert. So
Andy, there's no need to reestablish your masculinity. That's okay.
But actually, funnily enough, at the Slash concert, there were all these like not that many, so I don't want to like overstate it, but there was definitely like multiple groups of school age girls there. And I think it was a bit of a counter, like a rebellion to Taylor Swift. It was like, I think what's going on is like for younger people, like of that school age cohort, there's the Taylor Swift crowd, and that's very mainstream, and it's probably so like pervasive everywhere in the schoolyard and all of that, that there just has to be a natural like counterbalance to that. They're just people are naturally going to be like, I'm not for that, and it's almost like you're almost so popular. She's so popular that it's like reversed, right? And then they're like, okay, what kind of music can we listen to? All right, let's pick like the most uncool music, and let's pick like 1980s rock and roll. Rock's dead, everybody. Like let's go and hence 15-year-old girls at a Slash concert.
Oh, the irony. What's old is new again. But I mean, just to be fair, I suppose, on Taylor talking about all this, masculinity, rock is pretty homoerotic, like I'm imagining Slash with his, little leather vest on, and he's got his like, he's got like oiled up with a guitar, like making love to it, like a giant penis on stage. Like it is actually quite homoerotic, that kind of 80s rock, although I know that Slash would not love that description or that characterization, but it's
have you ever heard of a band called The Struts?
No, I haven't actually.
Okay, so they were the supporting band for the Slash concert, and they're not like a really new up and coming band. They've been around for quite some time, like maybe 10 years or something, but they've never quite like cracked it into mainstream. So they're a British band, but the lead singer, and actually all of them really, are very flamboyant. So they're almost channeling a little bit of like Freddie Mercury-esque style showmanship.
Theatrics.
Yeah, and it's very, very, very homoerotic. And I actually just was, because I didn't really know much about them. So after the concert, it's like I saw them as the support act. I did Google like, is this guy gay? Because like he absolutely, every part of like his whole act was very, very, very
It's
in
got
that.
Yeah,
it was like bring on Mardi Gras kind of thing. But he's not. He's like a straight guy. So I actually wonder if that's the equivalent of like cultural appropriation, whitewashing, like that kind of thing. Yeah, because he's like a straight guy, like, but he's acting super gay on stage. Anyway,
Well,
but he's like very entertaining though.
Mick Jagger was the original kind of like, he's got that mincy move, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm trying to not stray too far from the questioner here, and I think that
we've already done that.
But just
classic
to,
politician.
Look, just to come back, I think that the first part I'll respond to is that I do not think, I don't want to give anyone the impression that I'm trying to denigrate the music in any way. It's just that I'm not a fan. And I think what I was saying in the last episode was that I don't think you need to feel shame if you don't like it as a man, right? Because I think that it's almost, that's the charge, I think, almost like in the same way people say, well, if you only appreciate male comedians, stand-up comics, take a good hard look at yourself in the mirror. And it's like, no, not really. Like, I don't think you don't, I'm not one to actually force things on people, right? And especially with something like music and arts, you either like it or you don't. It could be that the fact that you haven't given it enough of a chance, and there might be reasons for that, but I don't think you need to lose any sleep there, right? Like, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. And I was just saying that from what I've heard, and because I'm not a fan, I haven't explored her whole back catalogue. It's not made for me, and I don't really appreciate the pop music like I do appreciate other pop. I'm a huge Michael Jackson fan, and I love a lot of pop songs, but her music doesn't resonate with me. I like Miley Cyrus, but it's not for me, right? And I think that I don't want to kind of lead the audience to think that also whether she's some kind of industry plan or her music's overly produced. Like, I'll give props where it's due. She does seem like a songwriter. She's been in the industry for a long time. She's obviously talented, so I want to kind of start off with that, clearing that up. So Swifties, don't come at me. It's all good. I'm just saying, if you're a man and you're kind of like, what's wrong with you? You don't want to be at the concert. It's like, don't worry, just settle down. That's okay. Look, like we don't all have to love this thing, right? Like, there's definitely a groundswell where it's like a FOMO. It's a concert, it's like a cultural event. It's having its moment. And people just want to go to it because they feel like they're missing out, like as a spectacle rather than I'm a fan of Taylor Swift's music. And that's okay. It's kind of like that Matilda's factor. It feels the same to me. It's like it's so big that everyone is attracted to it like a magnet. And like that's his own thing, but it's not about the music at that stage.
I think with this whole blitz that we've been through with Taylor Swift is I actually wonder in like 6 months' time, is it just are we going to remember it? Are people going to remember it? Is it going to be this? I don't know. Just like
it's just a fever dream.
Pandemonium, like I think we've reached saturation point with Taylor. So
all right, let me know. I need one more from you because
one more. Come on,
because you're the Swiftie. Come on.
Hey, she's Taylor's written her name in your blank space, hasn't she?
I did like that song, actually.
Oh, here we go. You are a Swiftie after all.
No, I do like that song, actually. But look, the question was going to be to you, though, Andy. What revelation is going to have to come out? What scandal is going to have to come out for you to say, look, Roger was right. She's, it's all manufactured. It's all kind of like executives put together by AI.
I don't think you understand. I agree with you on all of this stuff, right? Like, she is like a manufactured image. She's a product, right? She is carefully cultivated. Like, she's cultivated her image. She's built up the machine behind her. I'll give her, I mean, I don't know what her songwriting situation is, but let's just take it at face value. She writes all her songs, and she's actually a good artist, and she's a good entertainer. So she's got all of those natural talents and all the rest of it. But to go from just like, there's lots of good, talented artists and performers in the world, right? She's not the only one. But what makes her kind of quite unique is the commercial acumen, the brand, just knowing, like, not misstepping, like not making wrong decisions, and building up the snowball effect and the momentum to get where she is. Like, and I don't know that it's necessarily like at the confection of like a record company or something like that. I feel like she's almost bigger than the record company, like now. So I think she's done it herself, and I think if she can't take credit as an artist in the artist sense of that definition, she can certainly take credit as like a commercial like master, basically. So yeah. So I agree with everything you've said, but like, hey, the music's catchy sometimes.
My sister went to the concert, and she's had the same thing. Look, everyone, it's like 1 million Frenchmen can't be wrong. Everyone comes away with it saying it was amazing, right? And at that point, you've tapped into something a lot bigger than a 3-minute song that you hear on the radio. And so, hats off to you. But no one can describe it with any kind of detail. Like when people come away, it's the best thing, life-changing. It's like, okay, what happened? Oh, it's incredible. Everything happened.
You know what I think we should do? I think we should, you and I will we'll get the cameras out, and we'll record us watching her movie of her Eras tour.
Have a watch party.
Yeah, and we'll just we'll watch it together, and we'll see what we make of it.
I think we should formally extend an invite to Taylor that we will take her for a Bunnings sausage. I think that, like
Sandwich.
sausage sandwich, and we'll leave the Vaseline tub at home, and it'll all be good.
All right, Taylor is, I don't want to say dead, buried, and cremated, but Taylor is, we're putting her to one side until she tours again.
Yeah, it's like saying the phrase, bro. It's good for a day or two, but then you got to move on.
All right, yep, which we shall do until we watch the Taylor Swift documentary. All right, so I was looking through my social media feed the other day, and I saw a post, something to the effect that good managers are, or good leaders, I can't remember, probably leaders, I think. There are two things you need to be a good leader. One is you need to know your job, and you need to know the job of the people who work for you. And the second is you need to be kind, and you need to, I guess implied in the term kind is probably a whole bunch of things, but it could just be that you get on with people, you treat people with respect, you have empathy, you're understanding, whatever, right? A whole like range of things, no doubt, is meant by the term kind, right? And I was sort of thinking about this because I've just finished reading a couple of books on like some, fairly kind of notable and very successful leaders, business leaders. Well, the one that I was thinking of specifically was Elon Musk. We also recently read the one on Sam Bankman-Fried, but we know how that ended. But like, anyway, it did get me thinking, these guys aren't like known for being kind, right? That's not a trait that like you associate with them. Yeah. And I know, and then it got me thinking about a whole bunch of other quite notable, successful leaders, not necessarily in the business world, but, people like Steve Jobs, people like, even like politicians like Winston Churchill, or just, they're kind of, politicians are like famous for being brutal and cutting and harsh to their staff. They're not famous for being kind to their staff. And these quite, significant business leaders are virtually never famous for being kind to their teams. In fact, the thing that made them so successful is they were uncompromisingly harsh and had such high standards, and that they didn't care about like your personal experience as someone who worked for them. They're like, if you're helping the company, great. If you're not, ship on out. Like, we don't want you here. So anyway, I thought it would be interesting to unpack this a little bit further.
Yeah, it is quite interesting around leadership, and I think that my view on it is that that there are levels of leadership as well, right? Like, I think that if you are some genius founder, or even just taking the Sam Bankman-Fried thing, he is, like, he needs handlers. He's so rough on you, right? Like, and not even just like, he's like oblivious in terms of the social skills. So what he brings to the table, and in terms of his genius and his kind of vision, needs to be almost like padded and translated down to regular social settings, right? And I think that there can be that dynamic that happens, right? I'm sure that someone like Elon or whatever, who is quite quirky and, has been, seen to have very atypical kind of social traits, he probably does have a lot of handlers and people that know how to get the best out of them. And you see that with really extreme performance in athletes and actors as well, right? They're always like these high-performing actors or athletes. They're super quirky. And like, part of that's what spawns the whole industry of being an agent or a manager, is like, you have to manage your talent to get them to do things right for your clients, right? And I think that there's a bit of a history of that, right? Like, I think a lot of, like, can you imagine someone like I don't know, like a Kanye West, right? Imagine their manager. Yeah, he probably doesn't have one now. Imagine their manager is just like, I've got this crazy genius and I'm sitting on I'm managing the golden goose, but he's a sensitive piece of horseflesh, right? Like I look at him wrong and he's going to like walk off stage, or or the manager of Axl Rose, right, in the glory days of Guns N' Roses. These people that need to be there to get the most out of these eccentric people. So I think that sometimes that kind of thing happens, but you wouldn't tolerate that down into middle management, I guess is where I'm going with this. Like I think that if you had a middle manager that didn't have some of those more compassionate people traits, they wouldn't last that long, I think. I don't know. What's your experience been? Have you seen that?
There's this association between kind of genius and having weird oddities, right? There's almost like the more of a genius you are, they're often on the spectrum, or there's some other spectrum of geniusness that means they also have these other weird traits.
Can you imagine how bad you must feel if you're like the one dumb Asperger's person, like, and everyone's got this idea that like Rain Man people are smart. It's like, no, I'm just a Rain Man, and I'm actually not that smart either.
I'm just like,
it's like being like a black guy with a little dick, right? You're just like you're always working against the stereotype.
Well, the signal still works, but no, like I guess the problem is there's that for some, like people have like genius traits, if you like, but then I don't think that's actually what's going on. Like, I don't think that's what makes them bad, or like, let's say not kind, right? Because this is the key word, kind, right? I don't think that's actually the thing that makes them kind. I think unkind rather. I think it's more that there is a trade-off between wanting to pursue or being someone for whatever reason, whether it's because you don't empathize with other people or whatever, but there is some sort of trade-off between wanting to pursue excellence and at kind of any cost sort of thing, and your ability to be kind. Like, it's hard to be kind to your team if you really do need to whip your team into the next gear. Like, you can't, they're just not compatible. So if you're dealing with something extremely important, or I mean, if like, let's say Winston Churchill, right? Because he was quite famous for being, I don't know if an unkind person's the right word, but certainly, like he would,
blunt.
Yeah, very blunt and sort of, yeah. But like if the stakes are like war and kind of victory in World War II, then you've got to be a little bit less precious about, and less kind of pandering to people's sensitivities, right? And I think that's kind of what happens with leaders who, it's like a selection, it's like a selection pool, right? Where successful leaders tend to lift up from the lower levels of management up to then the next level, precisely because they have the attributes where they're less concerned about, like they're willing to make that trade-off. They're willing to push their team and expect more than what others might be willing to accept, because they're worried about being unkind. And so the tendency to be kind is actually an impediment in that sense, because it means that person's not making the right decisions that ultimately is in the interests of either the organization they work for or everyone else in the team.
I think it's like you're a product of your environment and the incentives, right? And I think if you're someone who, say, has started in a corporation, a modern corporation, and you've worked your way up into the executive suite, right, and you're right at the top now, I don't think you would find as much crazy behavior there or unkind and aggressive behavior there than you would for some of the examples you use, because most of the examples that when people write a biography about you, very rarely is it someone that's worked up their way into the C-suite, right? They're founders, and they don't give a shit because they haven't had to work their way up. They've founded something, and that's why they're the craziest of all. Like, your Jeff Bezos, your Steve Jobs, your Elon Musk, right? These people that haven't had to answer to anyone, entrepreneurs and founders, are the craziest of them all, because they haven't had to. It's like that whole, you're a fan of Survivor, right? It's no different in a corporation. You can't be assertive because yes, you can be Machiavellian and you can be cutthroat, but you need to have enough of a base, like you do in politics, to actually ascend up to the apex of the organization. And so I think like the modern way to do it is through some of these features like kindness and other things like that, all right, or like a fake kind of kindness, because that's the way you do it, right? You need to be loved by the people, right? Like, and I think if you burn everyone on the way up, then you're not going to last that long. Now, I think where people would argue is this idea around like assertion versus kindness, and I think it's a legitimate thing, right? Because you don't usually see this combination in people in real life. It's like, can you be kind and assertive at the same time, right? And you probably can, but the examples are few and far between. And I think that's where like a personality trait thing might come into it as well, right? Like, can you have that level of assertiveness and still be really kind and understanding, right, without being seen as a pushover or people taking advantage of you? And I've had plenty of managers, or like I've run into plenty of and worked with plenty of middle managers that suffer from that lack of assertiveness, right? So they'll kind of like not want to rock the boat. They'll kind of like, you know, really, really care about their team liking them, and as a result, never deal with the problem, right? And I think where I've seen it come out a lot is managers or middle managers, and I'm not talking about executives now, not dealing with problem employees. Like, I mean, that must be the most common example that everyone feels working, you know, like that you run into this person who's problematic and they've been like that for their whole career and no one wants to deal with them, right? They don't want to deal with the confrontation. They want to deal with it. So they just keep getting passed around and making everyone's lives miserable, where a strong leader would sort that shit out straight away, you know? And I think that's the thing, right? Like, that I've seen, this kind of like, the irony of being really, really putting all this effort into your hiring process, but then once they're in, never firing them instead of like letting people in and improve and actually having a good way to fire someone. Like, I think that this kind of culture breeds that lack of intensity that you see.
So you talked about like a big corporation, but you know, you could say this about any sort of big multinational blue chip company where there's a system of sort of getting by and getting up, and being the brutal dictator sort of approach isn't going to work in the same way as it would work for a founder of a company.
Yeah.
Because the founder of a company they're sort of empowered to do that. But nonetheless, I would say that those successful founders that you mentioned, Bezos, Musk, Jobs, so on, they're the ones that we talk about as successful founders of a company who have this trait. And the reason like they are kind of notoriously unkind is probably not necessarily because they're founders of a company and they've been allowed to get away with it, but rather that they're successful founders of a company precisely because they possess this trait of ruthlessness. And in the context of like, let's say a corporate scenario, I just think this is this notion of like being kind and being loved by the people like within an organization. And that you don't have to be like brutal and all of that. I think this is just the equivalent of a politician who is very lovely to the people when they're off doing the community events on the weekend, kissing babies and all the rest of it. But behind the scenes, they're ruthless. They are not nice people behind the scenes generally. I mean, I'm actually, you know what, I'll give them credit. They generally do kind of give a lot of themselves to support causes in the community and all that. So I don't want to tarnish all politicians, but like as a general proposition, like politicians are ruthless. Like they're people who are very ambitious and they've done things that like to even just to be like pre-selected for a political party, you have to do things that most of the population are not willing to do. And so they have that side to them, and that's sort of necessary for them to get shit done. And yes, they've got their game face, but like that's not necessarily the same. So I think when we talk about like, let's say you talk about a manager on say $500,000 a year, I'm pretty sure they're ruthless. I'm pretty sure they've done things that maybe they have that I'm a good guy sort of image cultivated about themselves. But I would be very skeptical that they're genuinely a nice, like, or they meet the kind of, if you take into account everything they've done, backstabbing their colleagues, and you know they've climbed the ladder in a way, they've done a lot of dirty shit to get there.
Yeah, you're not gonna back me into a corner where I'm defending any corporate executives. That's just not going to happen today, Andy. But all I'm saying is that when you work at these blue chip organizations, it's not something that promotes this outwardly cutthroat thing. And I totally agree.
Yeah, not outward. Yeah.
Some of it could be behind the scenes, but it is still this idea of like the people managers need to display outwardly these values, right? And I don't think, like, and that kind of affects things. Like in the same way that, there's that famous video of Kevin Rudd like shouting at his interns and swearing. He's like, that's fucking hopeless and all this kind of stuff. And then he like puts his game face on for the media, and then he like is all sweet as pie again, right? Like that affects people. That makes him. That says to it speaks to his character and his likability, and like it's not even the rational side of you knows this is the case. Like of course right? Like you're going to have to be highly assertive and all this kind of stuff to get things done, but we don't want to see it. We don't want the mirror to be held up. You want to believe that you're working for someone who is decent, right? And not some kind of narcissistic megalomaniac, right? Which is probably what they needed to do to compete. It's really relevant. It's really relevant. I don't want to take us too far into like the whole gender pay gap thing, but I think this is the reality of really high achieving executives, that it's a personality trait, right? Like it's a very few of us, both men and women, who have the ability and the want to really act like this, right? To kind of like give everything, to be energized by like your climb to the top and your striving for power. And I get that. I believe that. You'll get an argument here, but there are some people that genuinely aren't like that. And I guess what I'm kind of trying to question here with you is that, can those people still be successful at the right place and the right time? And I think the answer is yes. And should there be a place for them to be successful? Because that's really like to the heart of some of the gender pay gap stuff and other kind of organizational change. That's really the question here. Can you actually make space for a different type of leadership with softer cans, right? Because I think that's what people are grappling with.
But I think maybe the problem is the term itself, kind, right? So which is itself very loosely, or there isn't really a clear definition of what's meant by that. But if we're talking about purely like just generally like arsehole qualities, right? Being someone who unnecessarily like maybe makes ad hominem style attacks on people, or tells people they're worthless, or, that sort of stuff is not. It's not consistent with. It's not a requisite to be a good leader or good manager and achieve big things, right? So let's tick that box off, right? But the thing is, like, I think when people think of like they're bad managers, like or maybe they might describe them as unkind managers. I think they're often talking about the managers who maybe actually just pushed them a little bit and gave them honest feedback, and maybe took the feedback as an attack on them and their worth and taking it personally. And maybe the fact that they were pushed like a little bit harder, like that they were pushed to meet a certain deadline, like maybe they were pushed to work a 50-hour week one time and told, look, you really got to step up here because we need, and it is that assertiveness thing. It's that kind of really getting the outcomes. And I think sometimes, people perceive that as relating to how kind someone is. If they're not there kind of indulging someone in their lack of resilience, perhaps, maybe they get rid of someone who's not very resilient, and then they're perceived as unkind for that sort of a reason. And I think, at the end of the day, you've got to kind of allocate the key pieces of the puzzle to get jobs done, and that does have tensions. But I suppose just with the sort of the example of like, I guess, levels of leadership, right? Not everyone can hack a fast-paced, high-pressured environment. Yeah. So we've talked about, if you're working directly with Elon Musk on his SpaceX rocket, if you're in a job where you're even in the same room as Elon Musk, you're probably a very ambitious, competent. You're cream of the crop, right? Probably. So to hold you to a high expectation is is appropriate. And Elon Musk probably does that. And in fact, there was this anecdote where Elon Musk said to his, I don't know if it was his wife or his partner, one of the, either or, he said, if you're, so this is to the mother of his child, basically, said, if you were my employee, I would fire you. And it's that kind of ruthlessness which is actually makes him deliver and achieve really big impact, right? But it makes him really horrible as a person at the same time. So it's like they're inseparable kind of thing. And I suppose anyway, just to wrap it up, the masses, if you like, aren't kind of at the extremes of the distribution working on these really elite kind of things. They're filing what's that meme, TPP reports or whatever from
Office Space. Yeah,
Office Space. I can't remember what the anyway. Certain reports, they're doing mundane tasks, routine tasks. They don't really care. They don't aspire to be, the CEO of a company. They just want to get their paycheck and go home and play video games or whatever. And those people don't want that. They don't want to be exposed to that.
And they won't tolerate it. And I think too, we've spoken about Gen Z culture, Gen Y culture when it comes to the workplace. I don't think that they tolerate that kind of leadership anymore. They don't respond to that, right? And that is a bit of a cultural thing, right? Like even the top end of town. Like I think that you're always going to get some people who will be willing to follow a very charismatic leader or something like that. But Elon didn't start off that way too, right? Like he would have had to deal with these things. And you need people to organize and work with you. And leadership involves a level of trust, right? And I think that now he's in a different stratosphere because of his notoriety and his fame and his companies that he has, right? But it all starts somewhere, right? Somewhere small. And I think that the interesting thing is how do you build trust with someone to get them to follow you, right? And when some people following doesn't come naturally. But yeah, I don't know. I think that I would like to see this idea of doing things, maybe kind's the wrong word, like you said, but doing something in a respectful way. And I've seen it when it's very maladaptive as well, if I'm totally honest. Like people that are managers or people managers that have no business being people managers because of that, right? Like I think that, and this is the curse of the hierarchy, right? Like if you're only getting into middle management to get out of middle management, which is what they say, up or out, you're probably not going to be a very good people manager, right? And I think that the people that suffer are your team. You don't have to be a dick about things, right?
But see, this is the thing I don't get, right? I think the easiest mode of management is to be kind, right?
But that's because you're not a dick. That's because you're not a dick. Right?
No,
if you're genuinely conceited or feel like you've got a superiority complex, or you treat your team like real subordinates that are beneath you, then it's not going to be like, the rational side of me says be nice. You just behave like the entitled brat that you are, right?
But at the same time, well, maybe there's a characteristic trait then, because you might describe them as brats or superiority complexes or whatever, but let's be honest, people who tend to form that view of themselves, not always, but a lot of the time, it's because they've had in their experience in their life periods where they have been top of the class, they've been the one that gets stuff done, they've been promoted, because they've got shit done, and it's a reinforcing thing. So it's not just that to have that kind of view of yourself, it's not necessarily just that you're a narcissist. It can be that, in your career and in your life, you've done things that you look at everyone around you and they've not achieved anything even remotely equivalent or similar to you, and so you lose patience for people, and that can be a thing. And to be honest, if you're a billionaire, let's say for example, you definitely that's the case. That's true. So there's a space for that, right? There's got to be a space for people who are at the extremes of the distribution. And there's also dimensions we're talking about here, not just like intelligence or anything like that. It could be just generally, like, it can be even their ability to, leverage other people to get other people to do what they want them to do, even if it's not through being kind, right? It could be through being an arsehole, right? Like, sometimes that's very effective, right? Bulldozing through people, it's effective. It can be very effective. And that's what gets promoted in organizations. And I know that you said, well, you've given examples of modern organizations and younger people not necessarily buying into that. But I still think I think this is human behavior we're talking about. And I think this is going to, whatever strategy or tactic gets you ahead is going to be used. And people very quickly throw in their morals at the door if they feel like they can get ahead, if they follow a suite of actions.
But it's changing, though. You've got to admit. Like that.
Well,
old
I think it is
school kind of stuff that you're talking about.
I think it's more culturally. It's. I mean, it's not acceptable to slag off your employees in a very disrespectful way, right? I don't know if it ever was, but probably less so, right? But I do think, just to the term kindness and this concept of like being kind, like I do think. Let's like make this a bit more tangible, right? If someone comes to you and says, "Oh, look, I'm not feeling 100% today. I think I'm just going to take it a little bit easy." And okay, every manager says, "Okay, on a one-off." Then this happens again, and then the kind manager says, "Okay, yeah, take all the time you need." And the unkind manager starts to think, "Okay, I'm going to watch that. I'm going to watch that in this person." And then the third time it happens, the kind manager's still going, "Okay, yeah, we'll rock and roll with that." And the so-called unkind managers starting to say, "Okay, this is starting to compromise organizational and operational objectives here." So, and they might intervene. And so that employee views that as a sign of unkindness, but actually it's just that they're intervening and they're doing what's in the organization's best interests.
What I'm saying is that there's a bit of a trope in there, and it's a bit of a bait and switch, right? Because you've got the kind manager essentially using that kindness as a bit of a crutch for actually having a hard conversation with someone. And my challenge is that you can still have a hard conversation with someone and deal with the problem, but in a kind way, right? Like in a respectful way, maybe is the better,
respect,
term, right?
But the eye of the beholder is that this manager is unkind, right? That's what this is how it's perceived, right?
Yeah, but like it's all how you deliver a message, right? And I'm just saying that there are people that can deliver a hard message in a nice way. You could, even in that example, you could be like saying to the person who's not performing, just look, we like working with you. You're a valued member of the team, and if we don't fix this together, it's going to cause problems, and we're not going to meet our goals together, right? Like that's a way of being nice, delivering a bad message in a nice way, versus, and we've all met this kind of manager that's just like, you're not meeting your deliverables and you've got to work it out, otherwise you're out of here, kind of thing. They'll say that, pretty much a version of that to the employees, or worse yet, they'll just kind of ignore it and just divert work away from them, try to get them moved until the problem just festers so long that they either quit, get pushed out, or move. So it's just challenging this theory that if you are kind, you're weak.
Maybe the problem in this conversation is where we probably don't disagree too much, but again, like I think people infer, I think kind is like almost, let's just take it as a very broadly conceived term. Like kind can be everything from, they make me come into the office, they don't let me work from home every day of the week. Or it can, like, these kinds of things fit into that broad conception of what people increasingly perceive as
the perception of kind.
Yeah, and the perception of like their empathy, or it can be like, I mean, okay, let me just give you a very brutally honest sort of perspective, right? There'll be plenty of employers out there who don't give a shit that you've got a family, because you know what? They're a small business and they've got bills to pay, they've got commitments, they've got all sorts of things, right? That you have your own family and your own responsibilities, isn't their responsibility, right? Isn't the responsibility of the business owner who's got a mortgage and their own commitments, right? And so the moment that business or that employer says, you know what, I'm not going to give you, like, let you take the piss, right? I'm not going to give you all this extra flexibility that you're seeking for your family, right? Simply because you feel you're entitled to it. Because I got my own commitments. I got my own bills to pay. I got my own family to look after.
No, but the trick here is the market, right? So there's like a market for talent, right? And if you are someone like that, where do you think your talent's going to go? They're going to go to the other big organizations that do.
Yeah,
have
but that's
benefits.
great. That's good. You just get left the ones without kids, right?
And you'll
pay
realize,
them a bit more, right? Pay a bit more, but just
and you'll realize why they never had kids. No, but I'm serious though.
Because they're dedicated and committed to their careers.
No,
but they work 80-hour weeks. That's why, for free.
There's a reason why corporations are willing to take this hit, this cost or inefficiency, is because it attracts talent and they get people poached, right? Like,
yeah, I don't know.
There is mobility in that.
Yeah, I don't know if that's strictly true though. Like, I think that probably is overplayed. Like, I think there's definitely some sort of, okay, so bigger organizations can do more because they can absorb it, right? So they can say, well, if one out of the team of 100 needs to go on leave for an extended period of time, we can absorb it because we've got 99 other people in the team. It might sound a little bit over the top to suggest that they can almost give it for free, but in some ways they can absorb it and they can cover it. But when you have, like, if you're a team of 3 and then 1/3 of you've got no capacity to do that, right? There's no, it's not, the market doesn't allow, if that's what the market demands of you, you can't extend that.
But
so
it's like anything though, right? Like if you are offering a 6-month paternity or maternity pay program and all your competitors are at the 3-month mark, you're going to attract the better talent. And then those better talent over the lifetime of them being at the company makes the difference.
I mean, I'm just being completely honest. Like, I don't necessarily know that that organizations who are really after, like, talent who's really going to push the envelope for their organization necessarily want family people, right? I think they want either young people who will bust a gut for very low pay and very ambitious and do so at much lower income than everyone else in the organization, or they want people who, maybe either aren't as committed to their family in the sense that they're not going to be taking lots of leave, they're going to be present, dedicated to the organization as maybe their top priority even. Like, I think that's...
I just don't think that's how you build a sustainable company anymore, man. Like that won't... That'll burn out like that. You need layers. I mean, there's a reason org design is the way it is. You need layers to kind of, like, help with the succession and the building.
But what we're talking about is attracting, like, the elite talent within an organization, right? So in terms of, let's say, the base, right? The foundation of the pyramid, right? So, I mean, probably the reason why a lot of organizations have offered more of these sorts of programs is because of increasing female participation in the workforce, right? So it's not possible, and that's not just because that's what female employees expect, but it's also what increasingly male employees expect because they now don't have a full-time care at home, right? So they have to also take on some responsibilities that they may not have in the past. But that's for the base, right? That's what organizations have to offer as a baseline for their regular workers, so to speak. But I don't necessarily know that. But look, I think this is probably taking a little bit of a detour from I think what we're trying to get at here. But, like, this is really just like another take on the whole, like, cruel to be kind thing, right? And I just think this is my own personal view. So I don't think we're probably that different in how we think about it, but I think there's a lot of naivety in thinking that a nice manager is a good manager. Now, whether that's the same thing as kind, maybe I'm subbing kind for nice, to maybe narrow it down a little bit more. But that actually a manager who doesn't make tough decisions that their employees will not like is actually probably not a good manager. and not a good
Yeah.
leader. So yeah.
I'm with you there. And the reason I was calling it out, though, Andy, was like the example you used. You kind of combine this personality trait of a manager that is kind, but also like weak in terms of how they're dealing with the situation. Like they didn't deal with the situation because they were trying to be kind.
Well, okay, maybe to respond to that, I think it's probably fair to say a kind manager or a manager who aspires to be kind is less likely at the margin to make a call that their employees aren't going to like, right? Like that's the honest truth. A manager or a leader who does not give a shit about what people think about themselves are not going to make decisions based on how popular or unpopular they are. They're going to make decisions based on what ultimately is in the best interest of the organization and pushing it and taking it forward into the next level, right? A leader who does care about being kind and does care and does own that as a thing, even though they can be really effective if they don't take on board all the other stuff, but like they can make some shit decisions because of that. That is
the problem, though, because I think that you're kind of picturing this person that's using assertive personality traits, being cruel to be kind, to advance the objectives of the organization, right? So you're describing that kind of like founder energy. But what I've
it's not necessarily founder energy. It's just
well. Let me go there, because I think that what I've seen is most people with those personality traits tend to use that to advance their own objectives, not the company's. They don't give a shit about the company. That there are plenty of people in that bucket where they're just like, I'm managing up. I don't care about my team. I'm already past my team. Below, I'm managing up. And everything I do is to make sure that my boss's life is easy and I have favor with them so that I can keep on going. Even if it's at odds with the company, right? Like objectives. And I've seen that a lot.
But that's the key to getting incentives right? Like, I mean, you've got to design incentive structures that don't allow things that are counter to the organization's objectives. And ideally, and I think in more cases than not, the incentives are that what is good for the individual within that organization can be good for the organization too, right? So it's not always the case. There can be some areas where that's not strictly the case, but generally you do well in an area, you achieve. I mean, let's say the leader has a boss, right? Whether it's their board, if they're a CEO, whether it's, they're not necessarily the leader of an organization, but they're just a senior executive within an organization. It's their CEO saying, hey, I'm expecting you to deliver this new product, and I'm expecting you to do it on time in this certain way within this budget. And if you do that, bonus time, cha-ching, right? And then the incentives align that person, and they'll they might tread all over their stuff to deliver it, but if that's what the organization needs in the first place. I know you're such an Apple fanboy, but if Steve Jobs was a little bit more kind, would we have the iPad? Would we have the iPhone? Would we have, like, we probably, honestly, we wouldn't have them. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely willing to concede that.
I'll get you a BlackBerry for your next birthday.
It's like that quote from, what's ringing in my head is that quote from Michael Scott from The Office, where he's like, I don't want someone sucking up to me because they think I'm going to help their career. I want them sucking up to me because they genuinely love me. And that's just like the funniest thing, because I have also met leaders that feel like that, right? Like they need to be the man. They need to have their team feel like their family and that they love them. But really it's coming from this strange place of like, they think a manager should be adored, right? And should be like, that your team should go into battle for you. You're like a sergeant in the field. And this is where I think adaptability goes, right? Like, I think that another way to come at this whole question is like, design me a terrible leader. And I think that more often than not, you get characteristics from the more assertive end than you do from the kind end.
I mean, it's something you said earlier, which I agree with, is that it depends on the setting and the situation, there's, I mean, it's like if you're dealing with graduates, for example, new entrants to the workforce, that's probably not the phase of, or the context where you turn up the heat, right?
Well, I mean, I think the consultancy model is that. It's churn and burn down the bottom. And whoever's left.
No, but the approach they take in that setting is that they just get them to all compete with each other and out.
Yeah, pressure cooker.
It's just if you're not doing the thing that your colleague's doing, then, but it's not someone telling them they have to do it, or some asshole manager or leader. But I think so once you get to a certain point though, and it might even be that you say for 80% of an organisation, it might be that for 80% of headcount, exactly what you said's right. But once you get to that top 20%, it has to be more like upfront, like you leave your emotions at the door, and if you're not resilient to cop a bit of harsh language or some harsh, and when I say harsh language, what I don't mean is just general rudeness, but what I mean is more just like forthrightness. So this thing you did wasn't good. Someone saying that to you and saying you need to do better next time, like. Because that would be like, I think 9 out of 10 people in the workforce, if a manager was as forthright with them as saying that was not good, and here's the things you need to do to make it better. Like if someone got that really blunt message, 9 out of 10 people would take it to heart in a really, and then...
What do you think?
They would then internalize it and project onto the person telling them that message that's that person's fault for telling me that, not anything I've done that I've got to change or improve.
I mean, it's tough getting bad feedback.
Maybe to finish this off, like a question, because like I actually do have a pet hate when leaders draw out similarities between working in an organisation as a manager or leader and children, as though employees are like children. But nonetheless, like whilst I don't like that, I do think there's like I can see why people do it, because I'm about to do it now myself. It is the whole thing of like everyone, like I think a lot of new parents now aspire to take a different approach to raising kids, right? The approach where they're very understanding of their children and they're very tolerant of whatever different things their child has or wants to do or whatever. Or, doesn't want to get upset or angry with their child, doesn't want to discipline them, a lot of those kinds of things, right? It's like a new style of parenting, right?
Yeah.
Compared to the kids should be seen but not heard sort of mantra, right? But I guess I do think, certainly as I've been through my parenting journey, you kind of have to be a bit of a ball breaker sometimes. You have to be quite clear, firm, and uncompromising. And if you're not with your children, I think for all the good intentions you might have about being tolerant and nice and all that sort of stuff, being the cool favorite parent that, lets them get away with murder kind of thing, it's ultimately not in their best interests, right? And I think that the corollary within the workplace is that if you let someone underperform, and again, it's like the same thing, maybe it's a different thing, maybe it's just assertiveness and not dealing with a problem as opposed to kindness, but I think this is kind of how I feel about it, where it's like you have to prepare your child for the real world. You have to be a little bit tough. You can't. That doesn't mean you have to be extreme. It doesn't mean you have to get the cane out or anything like that. But you have to be a little bit tough.
Yeah, that kind of tough but fair thing, right? I think. Well, I mean, obviously, you should never compare it to children. It's funny, right? Like I remember actually managing someone. This one person comes to mind actually, and she had such a traditional view of what management should be, and she had this view, like I think that the other managers that she'd worked with were substantially older than her, and they were almost like father figures into this whole family thing, right? And she had that deep respect for them and stuff. So when it came time for me to manage her in an earlier part of my career, it just did not work for her because I was younger than her and she didn't respect me. Like she couldn't put me in that father role, right? Like it wasn't going to work, right? It violated that dynamic that she needed to have that respect, like you would respect a father to make certain calls, but they would also protect you and look after you and fight for you kind of thing, right? And I obviously had a different style. I'm not going to play that role, you know. I couldn't play that role for her. And so I had to find other ways to build trust and to get that happening, right? And it's never a good start to your leadership when your team goes, I don't see you as a leader kind of thing. And openly tells you. It's like, oh my God, like mutiny, right? Look, I think you're right now. I mean, the reason we don't parent the way we did, though, is because we know that it doesn't work, and that there are lots of unintended consequences of, you know, some of those older methods, right? I'm not talking about being firm and saying, you know, setting boundaries. I'm talking about like the more extreme ends. But what I would like to reference is Kanye West, right? His parenting style. So he kind of talks about this. He has this story that goes like, you're at a cafe, right? And there's this toddler, and the toddler like jumps on the coffee table, and then the parent or the adults say, hey, we don't jump on coffee tables, mate, right? Don't jump. And they take him off the table. And the toddler goes, I don't really understand why I can't, you know, but okay, fine. I can step on a step, but I can't step on this weird rectangular table. And then he says that as you grow up, like that happens just over and over again in a really arbitrary way, that you're an adult sitting in a room full of all these stacked up coffee tables all around you, right? And so in a typically easy way, he's talking about limiting the potential of a human, right? And I think that is some of it, right? It's this idea that if someone just tells you you can't do something, then you have this restriction on yourself, right? Like, and I know that's like a really artsy way of thinking about it, but I do agree with some of it, like especially coming from an immigrant background where there are lots of arbitrary rules. And it's not like your dad sits you down and says, oh, this is why I've done this, blah, 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 blah. They're just like, no, don't fucking do it. And if you do, you're gonna be outside with no dinner kind of thing, right? And you kind of have to like die on your feet or live on your knees when you're in that kind of environment, right? And that does have an accumulative effect on people, right? Put it this way. If your boss gives you a objective for achieving something, right? Like we need to cut out 15% of this cost base. I don't care how you do it. That's what we've got to do, right? And I'm not budging with that. You got to find a way to do it. If you turn around and say, look, if we do that, these things will happen, right? That will negatively impact it. And the manager goes, I don't want to fucking hear it because my manager's on my ass saying that I need to achieve this for him. And I do not want to take back problems. I just want to take back solutions. Otherwise, I'm going to be in trouble. If that happens and that guy gets chewed out, what do you think is going to happen next time? He's not going to bother, or she's not going to bother. And then you're creating this environment, this culture of not challenging anything, right? And I think that happens in small and meaningful ways over and over again, and that kind of defines the culture. And that's where I think where this stuff is wrong. And you talked about, you just need to align, you need to tweak the incentives. But this is a trust. It's like that trusted advisor thing. There's got to be someone in Elon's circle that can turn around to him and say, mate, you're fucking crazy for these reasons, and this is why you should reconsider. And if he doesn't have anyone like that, then it's only a matter of time. It'll all come crashing down.
On that note, you can be my daddy anytime, Roger.
Technically, who's younger? I can't remember.